You just heard what Eamon Javers had to say. Let's take politics out of it. What do the healthcare experts really think in terms of a second wave?
Well, I think, this is going to come back into fall in some fashion. Whether or not it comes back in an epidemic fashion is going to be dependent upon what we do, whether or not we have the screening in place, whether or not people are still practicing good technique to try to avoid infection, whether or not we have good track and trace in place where we're tracking down people who are sick and getting their close contacts and offering them testing and trying to get people into isolation. It's all going to depend on that public health work, but it's going to come back in the fall. This is a virus that's highly contagious. Coronaviruses circulate on a seasonal basis. There's no reason to believe this is just going to disappear and isn't going to become a more endemic infection. We see it now becoming epidemic in South America as they go into their winter. So there seems to be some seasonality taking hold with this infection right now.
So Scott, what do you do, though, to get the public to fully appreciate what you just understood? You were part of the Trump administration, so you would have been one of the 21% of the Republicans who think a second wave is coming. 93% of the Democrats do. Frankly, for people to avoid a second wave, to some degree, they need to believe a second wave is coming. And so the question is, how do you articulate that to the public?
Well, look, I don't know how they broke down that poll, but remember, there's a lot of states that weren't touched by this virus, and they happen to be more rural states and states in the South. A lot of those states are more Republican states, and so there's probably some political divide in terms of where this virus spread across the country. But now those states become the more vulnerable states, because if you look at cities like New York or Detroit, New Orleans, Chicago, they were pretty heavily hit. And so the RT, the transfer of this virus, is going to be lower in those cities because you're going to have more immunity. Not herd immunity, but you will have more immunity. And in New York, you're probably getting to levels of exposure that will reduce the transfer of this virus heading into the fall. And so the vulnerable cities become cities that are dense but were largely untouched by this virus. So you think of cities like Dallas where they didn't have a big epidemic. I think we need to remind people to practice good technique heading into the fall. It's going to be a challenge coming off of July and August, because I happen to believe we'll have a quiescent July and August and people will let their guard down a little bit. But, come the fall, we'll need to be very careful with this.
Scott, and you're already seeing in Georgia and Texas, they just had to reclose some churches that had been opened, and then they discovered that there were certain people with the coronavirus there. There's a leaked Pentagon document suggesting that the virus will last and still be with us, it sounds like in quite a meaningful way, at least that's what they're preparing for, through at least the summer of 21, so effectively a year from now, if not longer. Does that make sense to you?
Look, it makes sense that this coronavirus now is pervasive enough across the world that it will become one of the circulating strains of coronavirus. We have 7 other circulating strains of coronavirus that come every season. We often get them. They cause the common cold. This will probably become an endemic infection that circulates around the world on a seasonal basis, but we'll eventually have a vaccine. I think that's what the news this week showed us, that it is possible to develop a vaccine against this virus. Doesn't mean we have one yet, but there's indications that it's possible. So we're going to eventually need to get vaccinated for this like we get vaccinated for the flu.